I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Evan Pritchard. Evan Pritchard is a descendant of the Mi'kmaq people, part of the Algonquin Nation. He is the founder of the Center for Algonquin Culture. He's taught Native American history, ethics, philosophy at Marist College, Vassar College, and Pace University in New York. Evan is also the author of many books, a musician, and poet, having published and performed numerous works. Thanks for joining us tonight, Evan. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jess. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Now, how do I find share screen on here? I'm not seeing it right now.
You should see it at the bottom. It's a little green thing on the bottom next to the chat.
Okay, now I have it.
Cool.
That's good. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to start with words because, you know, Danskammer is a kind of a famous word, but not everybody knows what it means or why. And it's in the territory of the Warwick Munsee. And the Warwick are very interesting and now forgotten people, but that's right on the border of their land, the Warwicks. A good camping place at the mouth of a tributary, and that river that it was named after is the Warwick River, now called the Murderer's Creek or Moodna. It's interesting it got that name, but that's just you know, the background of it is Warwick people. There's a great sub-tribe of the Esopus Munsee. So I'm going to go down here to, maybe you can see this, Danskammer is a flat outcropping, sorry about the typo, of rock at the Orange County, Ulster County border. And it was a very important meeting place for the Warwick Munsee. And the Wappingers across the Hudson or the Mohi Conococheague also must have used it and had meetings there. So Beatrice Wadlin, who's a descendant of the first settlers, believes it was named Duivel's Danskammer by David Peterson de Vries in 1640. And you rarely see this detail that her, I guess, ancestors were there. But Peter de Vries was very interesting and more open-minded of the Dutch colonists who got along really well with the natives. And you know, there are some de Vries among the Ramapough. He apparently named it Devil's Dance Chamber in 1640, which, by the way, was kind of a rough year for him. Maybe he was a little, you know, whatever, concerned, but generally he got along well with the Munsee. So Devil's Dance Hall is what it means, and it's in reference to the many ceremonial gatherings held there, especially in the years leading up to Keefe's War, which he tried to stop unsuccessfully, and so he left. It's not, I can't turn that off. Now, the actual name, according to Wadlin, was Gintkan Alki. She translated as dance place, but Gintkan in Munsee is a phonetic spelling of Kintikan or dance making, but Alki means by the land. But more poetically, almost the same word is Kintikan Alkiu, which means the dance making place where you take a step and put your foot onto something. And this would be such as when you're stepping from a canoe onto a rock. And this is very interesting and perfect for Danskammer's point for the dancing route, because it is mainly accessible by canoe. And what happened was people could come right up with a birch bark canoe and go right to the edge of that rock and step up onto the rock and join the meeting. So it's very convenient. And it was interesting that it was another spot just like that, where it was mainly designed to have, you know, canoes coming in and out and unloading. And that was, you know, the so-called Indian Point, where they had powwows and gatherings, and people would, the Mohawks in particular, would come down, unload their trade goods, and then load them back onto the canoes. Well, this was a similar spot, only they weren't doing powwows here of that kind. They were doing the other kind, where they were not trading. They were mainly doing serious ceremony. And so they would look for signs there as they were doing their dancing, perhaps praying about the outcome of a battle or something, and then they'd find that an animal would come by. So that's some of the lore about Devil's Chamber. The word devil seems to be a popular word among the Dutch. In this case, I've read a lot about David de Vries through his writings. He wrote a wonderful book, Voyages of David de Vries, which everyone should read. And actually got to read a kind of a first edition up in Albany in a kind of a, what do you call those, dust-free rooms. So I have some other maps I want to share with you quickly. This will go by pretty quickly, and I hope I don't lose this thing. Here we go. Oh, I did lose it. I want to get back to my share screen here. Okay, let's try. I don't know why I lost my window. Hold on a second. Okay, so let's talk about the Newburgh area. Okay, computer's a little slow. So this is a map I made based on a road map of the Newburgh area. So it's a very busy area in this time period. Now, the chiefs are well known for the Waraneks at that time. There's Chief Warapikis was chief of the Waraneks in 1665. And this is only 20 some years after David de Vries names it. Anyway, here's my map of, quickie map of Newburgh as it was in the 1600s. There's a famous crossing from Fisher's Point, which, Denning's Point now. But here's Passaic Creek, and there's a heavy population here. Again, those are all Waranek people. And especially down here where 994, called the way where we under trail meets 9W, the short trail. And Liberty Street was all a trail, and Gidney was a trail. So if you get an idea, there's quite a number of them, and they are still, you probably driving them. So a very busy place in this time period. And further down is what's called Coahuila or Plum Point. And this is 207, the Skononoke Trail. Again, it's a Waranek tribe. So this is a lot of things that they didn't tell you in school, but I think they should have. And so the question is, how do I advance to the next without losing this? I guess it just, I'm not sure.
See if you have an arrow on the side that lets you go to the next picture. Otherwise, you'll have to close it and reopen the new picture. But a lot of times, it depends on what you're viewing it in.
Okay, well, I just minimized and there was no error. So let's, going from the south, I want to show you this map I made of this, the naming. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, I know it's small print, but this Pasquaskek is, Storm King here. And right here is this Waranek camping area, the mouth of the creek here, of Waranek Creek. And then you have Quisake up here and the cities up here. So this is the bottom of this area I'm talking about. The red areas are populations. And so you see, again, very busy place. And the chief, Chief Cowanham was here. And he was right at that point where, he would have been using Danskammer and going there and leading or overseeing ceremonies there. And yet he was on the edge of the colonial world. And in fact, because his name was Cowanham, they call him basically Cunningham. They ended up naming him Steve, which is very strange. Okay. But Warapikis was just before that. So I'm going to minimize that one. Now I want to show you, this is a treaty map, as long as these keep coming up. Okay. Oh, that's the a rough draft. But this map, actually, you can kind of see down here is here's Newburgh and Danskammer is right in here, and it's became part of Evans' patent, and that's not me. That was Captain Evans. But you see how it fits into the New Paltz patent and the Rochester patent, and the famous Nichols Treaty. So here's quickly Orange County. Okay, so tell me if one comes up you can't see, let me know. But here's the Hudson River on the right, and this is all of Orange County. You notice all Waranek. This is this, I think, very interesting Munsee tribe that we don't hear about. But this whole area had various sub-tribes of the Waranek, the Skononoke, and the Mistucky are in between. Here's the Ramapough and this whole other area. But above this is this Weranek group. And here's Indian Road is still there today. And there's Danskammer along here. So again, I'm not going to spend a little time on each, but what I want to show you is a new feature here. So this is something that I put together. Okay, can you see that? Yes. Okay.
Yes,
So this is in terms of these Weranek people, they're part of this very distinguished legacy and family tree. And there's too much to go over all of it. But you see, this is like the Proto-Algonquin background, which really isn't well known in terms of history. But Micmac, that's my people. And over here you have Proto-Mohican, and the Mohicans, and out of them come some of the New England groups. And then the Munsee, and again, these are not, this is just a one-dimensional view, but the Munsee become a distinct group. And then you have the Minisink, which develops into the Ramapough and the Tappan. And then you have the Esopus, which develops into Weranek. And Esopus continues, Weranek becomes a separate, maybe almost the same dialect. And the Shawnee and the Unami split off later. So here's where the Weranek fit into this very massive Algonquin tree of languages. And as go the languages, so go the culture. So this is a continental picture. This is Atlantic to Pacific. And the Atlantic side is on the east, and you have the Esopus branching off as Weranek here. So you see, like, you've probably heard of quite a lot of these different languages and nations somewhere as place names. And the Long Island group comes off here. So just to share that with you, how they fit in, because there's many steps through history that the people went through and split off and became these groups, Weranek, Tappan, Ramapough. So I'm gonna sign off of that. Now, this, I like to show this picture. This was connected to the Weraneks, was of course the Werinawankong, Esopus Munsee, and this is a self-portrait of Mama Nokwe that she drew as her glyph on the Nichols Treaty Renewal. And that's a Jenga tower, we can talk about that. But this is, anyway, a little bit of a part of the story. She had some influence indirectly over this region. During that time, they're calling it Danskammer. So I just wanted to show you some of those. And basically part of the whole picture, the large picture is very large. This is the Algonquin world. This is just the eastern part. You can see this? I want to make sure you can see it. Okay.
We can see it.
Okay, so all these colors represent, you know, different language groups that were on that other chart. And here we have the Mohicans in purple, and all of our Munsee, Unami, Delaware are in blue here, with the Powhatan coming out of that. But it goes across the whole country. And our Weraneks that we're talking about here today are right in here in the Hudson Valley, and a key part to this whole network of people who all call themselves Kitchi-Atugwogan at this point, which is actually, you would say, it's intelligible in Munsee. Kitchi-Atugwogan means the people who wear the deerskin. And people today, we refer to them as Algonquin, but this is not exactly one of the terms we would use. But you see how large a network that is. And so when people are meeting at some place like Danskammer Point, you know, that it's all related. So I just want to say that the whole idea of having a place right on the river is that canoes don't cost money, and they don't use fossil fuels. They had a fossil fuel free lifestyle, and that they had, you know, foot transportation, they had canoe transportation, which, you know, at times they could go quite quickly with their canoes. And, you know, one would want to take from New York Harbor all up to Albany, you might take 3 days or even more or less, depending on the weather and the tides. But the tides bring you one way and they also bring you the other. So people felt, you know, that this was kind of a gift from the creator, having the Hudson River. Mohikanutuk means the greatest of estuaries that flows both ways. And so the idea was that they felt this is like this great gift where we can go all the way to Albany on the tides and our muscles and come all the way back on the tide, and it's free. Okay, no fossil fuels, no pollution, if you want to call it that. And so they didn't need all that. And so I'm advocating for the return of the use of canoes by almost everybody who is safe using canoes. And there's one way to canoe on a great estuary like the Hudson, but there's another technique of canoeing in these portage routes that go off into the inlands. And they, again, no fossil fuels are used. And so that's why I think it's very interesting and appropriate that we fight pipelines at Danskammer, because first of all, you're disrupting a rich history there. And there are several native history sites fairly nearby, but also in general, because it's not good for the planet. More people should just not use fossil fuels or whatever, and then canoe more, and they'll get some better exercise and also save the fossil fuels. So that's kind of my main point. And you said there could be questions and whatnot.
Yeah, we have a question from an audience member. Could you post the name of the book that you just recommended during your talk? And can you tell us a little bit more about your book or books that you have?
Okay, this is a book. This is my newest book. It's called Mapping Mannahattawack, and it's published as a self-published as a kind of a workbook with with the comb binding, but it's very large. It has 240 some pages. And it goes through each of the place names in the map that's included in the book that has quite a lot of the both villages and the natural features. So the map in the book is in two parts. This is the Connecticut side, and it goes through each of the place names that anybody would probably want to know about. And so Danskammer is part of that. So then when you read the book, it helps you see how it all fits together. Now, I'm from Ulster County, around the New Paltz area, and near High Falls, which was called Sunk Ha Tisink, which is not published anywhere else, but I got that from the deeds of the area. And Sunk Ha Han is the headwaters of the tributary, and T means it's a council fire place, and Sink is the place. So T Sink is a council fire place. And this was where Mama Nukwe held her great council fires and did her oratory. So I'm living in the place that was cared for by the Esopus Muncie, and specifically of Mama Nukwe.
Great. And then somebody asked where they could purchase the book. Do local libraries have a copy?
Well, I've written it during the shutdown, during the lockdown, so nobody has it except me. But there's several ways to contact me. One's through the website algonquinculture.org, which I think you'll have posted later, and also just evan.pritchard7@gmail.com, and then I'll just set you up with how to they'll send it to you. It's in a priority mail, like 2 days or whatever. So should I mention the price, or is that too cheesy?
No, mention the price. That way people can prepare themselves.
Oh, well, I'm asking $20. That's just over cost. I mean, it's expensive to make them, but I want everybody to have them. So keep it that. And then the shipping nowadays is like $8.50 because it's it's heavy. So it turned out to be $8.50.
No problem. And then we have another question from Alan. Is Cedar Cliff opposite of New Hamburg a significant place?
Wow, great question. Absolutely. And I think that's mentioned in the book, also in Native New Yorkers, which is one of my books in around that came out in 2002. It's in that's probably in all the bookstores, and mentioned that cedar. What they do is they would think ahead. They would plant cedar at a place that they felt sacred, and then 20 years later, there'd be all these cedars for their children to enjoy when they were old. So they thought far ahead. They'd plant these cedars in these very special places. And why cedars? One of the things. Oh, thanks, James. One of the things is that the cedar is associated with the spiritual journey because the berry. Well, I shouldn't even say that, but the berries some certain gray berries people used to use you know, to help them see visions, but I don't recommend that. I've never tried it. It's very dangerous, actually, if you want to know. But that's part of why cedars are considered, you know, associated with a place of vision quests and meditation. And a cliff is a place where you see far. In Algonquin spirituality, altitude is very important. And there's association with the altitude from the sea to the level of consciousness that you're trying to tune into. So this is actually maybe an unfamiliar concept to some people, but it's actually a worldwide concept among indigenous people.
Great, great. Thank you so much. Another question, what is a patent, as in the Evans patent or the Paul's patent?
Yeah, and the Ramapough patent, actually have a map of that. Okay, let me explain carefully here. It's that the royalty can sell you a patent, and then you have to go and buy the land from the Native Americans. So if you get the patent and you screw up with the Native Americans, you're kind of in a tight spot. So there was a lot of pressure on the settlers to sell the land to the natives at a terms that they could understand and agree to. However, the natives didn't really think in terms of buying and selling land. So they would try to have a kind of a peace treaty where you agree that you're both going to live on the land, but you're going to live on it more than them for your lifetime, but that's it. And in a lot of these sales, the deeds of sale, which, you know, came after the patents, there'd be things like agreements that the natives could come and collect the eagle feathers from an eagle tree, and that the settler wouldn't take the eagle feathers. There's these kind of things. So it was a peace treaty where they would agree on how to get along. But some of the settlers weren't really savvy to that. They didn't like that idea because they were thinking in terms of buying the land, having it, you know, without any hassle, so to speak. So there were conflicts over this lack of understanding of land because the natives couldn't conceive, really completely wrap their heads around the idea of owning Mother Earth. And here we are in Earth Day, and we see what the consequences have been over 400 years of people just thinking once they buy the land, they can do the heck they want it with the land, right? So that's one of our basic problems. That people buy land and they think that's it, I can burn it all down because it's mine. And that's kind of what happens sometimes with these big industrial plants. You know, they spend all this money and they employ people, whatever. They think they own the land, but they don't really. Nobody can. It's not possible, you know, because we have land keepers running around in the spirit world and animals and plants that you can't really own because you're not God. Okay, so I'm putting my foot down. How do you like that?
Great, Evan. Thank you. Thank you. We have another question. Is there any info about Sullivan County?
About native info. Yeah, I've done some research there. I don't know of a book about the natives of Sullivan County. And, you know, I've included that here and there in various books, but not to focus. So, of course, there were natives in Sullivan County, but there's a book about the history of Sullivan County, and there's a famous author of that, and I have it in the next room, but I don't want to leave the camera, but can't think of the name at this second. But it just has a little bit about the natives in that book.
Yeah, because we do have a couple extra minutes because we're ahead of schedule, so you're welcome to get it. But if not, you can let me know and I can let that person know and just let the group know in the follow-up email.
Okay, well, if I can get it in 30 seconds,
yeah,
I will. Otherwise, I'll be right back. Hold on.
Try it out. Thanks everybody for joining us and tuning in. This event is going to be recorded, or it's being recorded, and it'll be sent out along with all the different resources that are being mentioned tonight, and helpful links, as well as future events and stuff like that. While Evan's looking for the book, I can tell you about a couple events coming up. New Paltz Climate Action Coalition, actually New Paltz Climate Smart Task Force is having the Climate Smart Meetup on May 6th. It's going to be about plastics. And so those of you who signed up to learn more about events will be getting that information, and everybody who signed up tonight will be getting the follow-up email for this event. And then somebody wants to know about the Mountains of Ellenville. While we wait for Evan, Glenn, did you want to do any plugs for any programs that Overlook Mountain Center is going to be having?
Oh, well, we have a hike scheduled for this Sunday up at Halcott Mountain in Spruceton Valley. It's pretty filled up at this point, but we do have monthly hikes. If you go to overlookmountain.org, there's a schedule that has all the hikes for the year. They're usually like the third Sunday of the month, and we do field trips to ceremonial stone landscapes, suspected ceremonial landscapes in the Catskills and Hudson Valley. So people are welcome to check those out, sign up for those.
Great, great, thank you. And Evan, are you back yet? He's not back yet, and we have a couple questions coming in. Here he is. Hello, Evan.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay. No, I didn't find it. So
it's okay. We have a couple more. We have a couple more questions. And we occupied people with some upcoming events that both of our organizations are doing. Someone writes, I'm in. I think it's called Pequi. People pronounce it that way, maybe. But is that a Native American name or tribe?
What? Not Pequot.
Pequot.
Well, there's Poquog in Dutchess County. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's what they're talking about.
Sure. Yeah, that's like a marshy place. That's a subtribe of the Wappingers, and that's yeah. I mean, I think it would be Wappingers, that particular main Wappingers group. I think they're split off of them, Poquog. So it's like a swampy place, but that's along a trade route now known as Route 55. And there's a place where it goes through a transition where the land changes, and there's some minerals they used to just be able to pick off the ground for trade, but it goes through a kind of a change in elevation. And so they would, that's where their village was. And then you go eastward, and then you have 22 and Route 7 who were also trails. And then below that, you had the Meads Farm, was an old Wappinger settlement that actually continued kind of undercover. They called it Meads Farm, and everybody just came and worked there. And in fact, if you look carefully, you'd see they were all Wappingers, so they weren't really claiming that. So it's a good area for late Native contact.
Thank you. Another question is, any info about the Mountains of Ellenville?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's I've done a lot of tours I've led tours of Sam's Point in many cases. There's caves and rock shelters throughout the area, which are pretty substantial in size. So it's hard to say how many people were living there in the early days, but they did live in caves sometimes, most in the winter. But the rock shelters were used by travelers, native and then non-native. So throughout the mountains, there's a lot of natives, and there were a subgroup from it. Remember Wawarsing? I believe that's Wawarsing tribe. There's a number of subtribes there that are significant enough. They have their own status in what was really, I mean, people would disagree, but everything I see, it looks for all the world like the Esopus were a confederacy of their own, because they had various recognized groups. So they just, you could call it what you want, but it works like a confederacy. So they had the Wawarsing, I mean, were one of those subtribes, as were the Warranek we've been talking about. They had a place on the council, and the Warrenawangkong, or these Esopus, Muncie, and Kingston, seemed to be the head group, and Mamanokwe would have been, for a short time at least, would have been the head, of those council fire meetings.
Very interesting. For our last question, was Esopus Island significant to the Muncie?
Esopus Island in the Hudson was called Rapus, and that referred to that little channel of water on the west side. And I was just there a few days ago, and not on the island, but on the other side, on the western side. And there was a group called the Aqua Nessing, who, which is like a noisy little water place in the mud. It means, it's a weird word. But they sold their land to the Dutch in 1696, and they left Dutchess County and they went to Ulster County, and they had been Wappingers, but then living in Ulster, they were adopted into the Esopus Muncie, And they were the ones that really stuck. They stayed and they settled at, oh, by the way, the old post road that lines up with Esopus Island and with the lighthouse, that road was the trail that they came west on, and it took them, you know, along the Wallkill and right up to what's now 32, an old trade route. And then they lived at Churchville, and they lived at Ridgeton, and they lived at Bonteque, and they lived at Libertyville in a big way, until the story is that somebody drowned there, and then they all left because they were worried about his ghost. That's what the historians tell us, or the colonists tell the story. So they left, but there were many of these aqua villages, and they stuck it out almost to the Civil War. And then it turns out they didn't pay their taxes or some dumb thing. You wouldn't think they'd have to, but they were caught on a technicality. And so the whites took the land based on the idea that they should have paid taxes, which doesn't make sense. And then they went off westwards up the what's now Route 17 to the Susquehanna, a village a very large village that was there for kind of refugees headed west.
Great, thank you so much. And we're going to move on from questions now. Thank you so much, Evan, for joining us. And so in the follow-up email, we'll have all of Evan's information, and then you can also subscribe to his email list and stuff by contacting him or somehow. And then he has so many different events and different things that he does as well. So we'll keep everybody in the loop about that.
Somebody asked about the email. I'll just say it another time. It's evan.pritchard7, that's Pritchard, number 7 at gmail.com. And that's kind of how I do everything, is through the emails. Okay.
Great. Thanks so much. And that's also in the chat, and we'll include it in the follow-up email for everybody who registered. So thank you so much, Evan. Thank you. So after learning so much about the history and importance of Danskammer in the past, I'd like to speak briefly about what's happening there in the present. Right now, there's a fracked gas plant at Danskammer Point. It operates a few times a year. The fossil fuel industry refers to it as a natural gas plant, but let's be clear, today in the US, natural gas is fracked gas. In the 1950s, a coal-fired plant was built there, and then it was switched over to use fracked gas after being flooded by Hurricane Sandy in 2012. The plant has a variety of owners over the course of its existence. And in recent decades, it's been the subject of a variety of lawsuits, as well as a labor union strike. In 2018, investors of the plant announced that they want to build a new fracked gas plant at the Danskammer site, one that would operate around 75% of the time. There's a host of reasons why this should not happen. It'll worsen the climate crisis. It might flood again since it's in a floodplain. There's various reports that show that we do not even need the electricity, and it's going to devastate air quality and harm the surrounding communities, such as the city of Newburgh. There's already been environmental racism happening there for decades because of the plant. The Environmental Protection Agency found that Danskammer was among the top 10 emitters of pollutants by weight in New York, releasing 1.4 million pounds of hazardous emissions into Newburgh's air, land, and water in the year 2000. So this is historically, recent history, been a point of environmental racism because it's impacting the community there. Asthma rates there are double the national average, and the city of Newburgh's residents are mostly low-income people of color that are already suffering from toxic drinking water contamination in the form of PFAS from a nearby military base, along with lead contamination. So their water is toxic, their air is polluted, and there's a company looking to make things worse. So it's a classic example of private gain for public risk, or to use a recent phrase from the Sane Energy Project, private wealth for public health. Enough is enough, and it's atrocious that a new fracked gas plant is even being considered for Danskammer Point. We should be getting rid of the one that's there that only operates a few times a year. When there's especially alternatives such as battery storage that can be coupled with renewable energy, and it won't be harming the surrounding communities. So there's a coalition fighting the plant expansion called the Stop Danskammer Coalition. We only have until August 31st to make sure that the public voices are heard. And we would love your support in the form of either a short written comment to the siting board, which is the decision-making body on this issue, or if you can sign our petition. And I'll send info about this after tonight's program, along with a guide on how to make a comment, what to comment about, because there's a variety of things that you can. And then also a way that you can join the coalition. And the only requirement to join the coalition is being against a new Danskammer. You could be an individual or an organization, a faith-based group, whatever you are. And if you're against it, you're welcome to join, and then you'll stay in the loop. So if you want to know more, you can check out stoptheplant.org. We have a variety of resources there with webinars focusing on different things, including one about the battery storage potential for the specific Danskammer site. We can stop a new Danskammer plant from coming to that site, and we'll evolve from the recent darkness that fossil fuel has brought to the land there. If there's any questions, I can take them in the chat, so that way we can get to the next speaker. Let me just double check to make sure that Chief Mann is on. Is Chief Mann on? Glenn?
Yes, he is. I'm asking him to unmute.
Perfect.
And
cool.
I believe he can hear us now.
Great. So I'll do the intro for Chief Mann. One moment. So our next speaker is Chief Vincent Mann. Chief Mann is the Turtle Clan chief of the Ramapough Lenape Nation, which encompasses Passaic County, New Jersey, Warwick, and surrounding areas in New York. For the past 5 years, Chief Mann has worked with the NYU Environmental Studies Department. In that time, he participated in the construction and implementation of a community health survey focused on identifying and addressing health concerns within his community. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Chief Mann, and to give us your perspective. Please take it away.
Anishik, thank you. Kiha Kolamosi, Ninju Shinzi, Kikai Man, Anishik Kishalo Mokwen, Elamiliang Yonkwai Kish Creek, Wakukana Aki, Waktinda, Wakmbi, Wakilongo Matsi, Waknimbu Masawakanam. Anishik, 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 Anishik. Thank you. My name is Chief Mann, as was said by Jess. I offered up a prayer on this day, Earth Day. Thank you, Creator, for giving us this day, our Mother Earth, the fire, and the water. We thank you for all of our relations, and we thank you for our lives. And then I thank the four directions. Many of you may know of me. I'm an advocate for the Ramapough people, specifically the Turtle Clan, whose core area is in Ringwood, New Jersey. For the last 40 plus years, our community has lived in a Superfund site that is still active. We have had this issue going on for 56 years with, no help, no sunshiny days for our people. All the things that we are able to achieve, we are achieving those with universities, and doing health studies, doing environmental investigations, and studying fish that were refused to be studied by the EPA or the state of New Jersey, finding them to be toxic. Not that our people fish there in Sally's Pond and Ringwood State Park, but the larger communities do. We also sit at the head waters of the Wanakee Reservoir, which feeds 4 to 6 million people, one third the population of the state of New Jersey, and the most populous state in the country. This Superfund site, will always be that, and the threat of the water for 4 to 6 million people will always be there. It really is a national security threat. When I think about Danskammer, I think that same thing. I think that, that's disaster that has really been unfolding before our eyes, and to utilize that sacred place in the same way is just a continuation, of the last 500 years to indigenous people. My uncle Evan, he offered up that, that area should return back to the people, not just us, the indigenous people, but also to the non-indigenous people who are like-minded. And to be able to utilize that, for returning that back, to the Mother Earth and to the people would be a tremendous thing. My brother Glenn is doing some tremendous work in New York State, locating and protecting ceremonial stone landscapes. We here too in New Jersey, through Ramapough Culture and Land Foundation, we also are doing the same thing, trying to protect those ancient ceremonial stones, from destruction, from removal. Those are our ancestors' prayers that were laid long ago. And to even move, one of those stones from the top of one, or, from the side, somebody wants to have one of those in their yard, that actually breaks that prayer that our ancestors laid, and it wasn't, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. We're talking 7,000 years ago or more. And our ancestors utilized these stone structures, to navigate the stars, to know when it was time to plant or time to harvest, or the time to get ready for gathering. And the solstice, winter and summer, and we still utilize those things today. We were blessed, by my brother Glenn, with a piece of property, that has been preserved. And we went there, on the winter solstice, and, we held ceremony. And it was one of the most amazing things for us as indigenous people to be, to walk freely upon our ancestors' lands that they stored. And, so me and my Uncle Paul and my Uncle Lee and my wife, Michaeline, we sat there when everybody else descended, and we had a ceremony there. And out of the blue, it began to lightly snow. And I can't tell you that feeling that overcame us all. It was as if our ancestors, and we know they are, were all standing around us, offering up their gratitude and humility for us, to remember them, to remember the land, to remember those stone structures, and remember those things that they left along the trails long ago for us to find, and for us to bring that back to all of our people, so that we can then, reconnect with them and realign ourselves with that natural world, to help to put this world back into balance. Because for the last 500 years, our world has not been in balance. It has been in an imbalance. And, that is due to colonialism. The Ramapough, it's not even said that way. And Ramapough would actually be a Lamawo. And Lamawo means downward slanting in our language. And it's a reference to the place in which we dwelled. And all of, my Uncle Evan, he puts it a certain way. That is because it has been recorded that way in history. But our ancestors did not call themselves all these different names. They referred to those names as certain places where our villages were. And when the Europeans came here, they mistook that for what our names were. A good example of that today would be that the river that was named after Lord Delaware, and those native people, the southern, the Unami and the southern Unami, and lived alongside of that river were ended up being called the Delawares. There's no such tribe as the Delawares. There's no such people as the Delawares. So, this is very enlightening, and we're making our tracks back to one of the village sites of the Ramapough, which there's many. Our villages stretched all the way from the Ramapough Mountains all the way into Connecticut, eastern New York and western Connecticut over to Ridgefield, and there's a very important trail over there, which our village over there was on. We are currently doing a cultural investigation ourselves into one of the worst massacres that had took place in this country, and that was on our relatives, our Ramapough relatives, as we see that, during 1644, I believe, with the massacre of Pound Ridge, with the hired gun Underhill. Also, another site that was another massacre was the Pavonia Site, and how it was recorded in that time was so horrific that when we take and read that information today, we just hear all the pain and suffering of all of our people, even to little babies being thrown into the river, the Mohicanatuck, and so their parents would jump in there to try to save the babies, and then they would sit there with their swords to make sure that they didn't come back onto the land. Babies hacked from their mother's arms. This is the history that no one wants to hear and that no one wants to admit, but the sooner that we achieve that, right, the sooner that we grieve all of that together, then we can begin to move forward, in this time that has been called upon by our ancestors, those who could see, right? The eighth fire has been lit, but the eighth fire, doesn't necessarily mean that, it's going to stay lit. It's required of us, indigenous people and non-indigenous people, to come together, for a brighter future, not just for tomorrow, but for the next 7 generations. We hope that, and we pray and put into the wind that this will come and stay into fruition, that we can all once again honor each other, just like we do every year now in Kingston, where I take on that responsibility, and I look at it as an inherited responsibility, to honor that Nichols Treaty between the Esopus, our people, and the English government. That treaty was supposed to be renewed every single year, and it was, I think, for 17 years, off and on. But then for a couple hundred years, it was not, and so we were out of balance, right? We were not holding up our end, and the English descendants were not keeping up theirs, and so we've taken it upon ourselves now to celebrate that treaty, to take that treaty and hold each other's ancestors in our hearts, so that their descendants, which is us, can remember that that's our inherent responsibility, right? To hold that treaty, the law of the land, that treaty that was made between each of our ancestors, that we could live in peace next to each other, that we could be there to help one another. And even though that treaty was violated many times, it's still an inherent responsibility of Kikai Man and the Lamawo, the Unapawak people, the Munsee speaking people, to hold that up. That is, we can't let that go unheld. There is, an opportunity here in the climate that we're in, and there's much change that's on the horizon. It's not only because we have a new president and vice president who sees the importance and the significance of the knowledge that local indigenous knowledge, that we carry across this whole Turtle Island. And, these are things that indigenous people and our non-indigenous friends have stuck by us to help us to get back to that rightful place of stewardship of our lands. We see, organic farming. Well, organic farming is just a natural way of growing things. It's what our ancestors did. It's what we still do today, right? We see that, removing invasive species. Well, sometimes our ancestors took species like Uncle Evan said, and we planted those species next to our villages so that we could have access to them, because we understood the importance of the medicine that comes from them. You know, and that's who we are: the Ramapough, the Lamawo, the Lenape, the Munsee speaking people. We are the ones who are still here, right? We hold no ill will towards anyone that's anywhere. Our relatives now carry the names of Delaware today. They carry the names of Bucktown and Munsee Delaware Nation and Stockbridge and Kansas Munsee and Brothertown. And, you know, we honor all of them with everything we do, because it is our inherent responsibility as the ones who are still here, who remain in this place, who gave up so much, who had so much taken away from them. You know, my ancestors were faced with a public lethal gas chamber, right? 1923. It didn't come to fruition, but what did was the realization of sterilizing our young women, right? And that study of eugenics, you know, still affects us today. You know, the toxic Ford paint sludge that was dumped into the mine shafts in Ringwood and on the open ground that we hunted and gathered on and played on, you know, that stuff was asked to be brought there by the Ringwood town, by the town and borough, you know, writing a letter to Henry Ford, the grandson, bring that industrial waste here, all of it from the Mahwah plant. The significance about the Mahwah plant is that Mahwah plant was built upon Mahwah Way. Mahwah Way was where our long homes were, where we gathered, right? It's at the confluences of all the trails from the north, the south, the east, and the west. Still use it that way today. And the other people responsible for allowing our people to be sick and dying, intoxifying the land, is the state of New Jersey, who actually issued a permit, right, for 1 year. And Ford was dumping 16 million pounds a quarter. So if you just take 16 million pounds times 4, just for that 1 year was enough to kill everybody in northern New Jersey. And neither the town, neither the state have been held accountable for their actions. And they haven't even offered health care or, you know, removing our community to a new community. And so we understand the fight that everybody's in. We understand it more so than everyone else. And it's time that all of our friends and all of our, you know, those groups and conservancies and coalitions help to raise our people up to the front, right? So that our voices can finally be heard. So with that, I want to say Anishik, and I want to let you know how grateful I am to have been invited to be a part of this opportunity today, and to be able to speak these words, not for myself, but for the Ramapough people, for our Chief Perry, you know, for our ancestors, and for our children who are yet to come for the next 7 generations. So Anishik, thank you.
Anishi, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chief Mann. Is there anything that non-natives can do to help?
There definitely is. So Michaeline and I created Ramapough Culture and Land Foundation. That's ramapough.org. On there, we have the history of the Ramapough people migrating from here to Connecticut and back, and occupying it all at the same time. We have links on there for food sovereignty, links to our farm, a Munsee Three Sisters medicinal farm, ramapough.org, ramapough.org. You know, there is also the Ramapough Lenape Nation.org. So what I would say is that, you know, right now, Michaeline and I and my Uncle Lee, you know, we're engaged in growing over 13,000 seeds right now inside our greenhouse, right? We're looking for volunteers all the time. One of those things that we need to help is to have done is to come to our land that we have in Andover and to get dirty with us on our hands and knees and bond and heal. You know, I think that our ancestors would look down at us both and they would smile, right? that finally, we return back to our ways. If the Munsee people or indigenous people as a whole were dead set on killing everybody who came to these shores, no one else would have ever made it back. Our ancestors were not the savages that were portrayed to be. We're good-hearted, loving, caring people, specifically the Munsee people. Quite frankly, we are the grandfather tribe. We are those people. Archaic time, oldest language is Munsee.
Thank you. And I'll be asking for some links from you. That way I can share them in the follow-up email for our registrants. We had maybe about 120 or so folks register, knowing that half of them would probably not make it, but they wanted to stay in the loop. So we'll be able to share your resources with everybody who registered, and that way they can share with their folks. And then somebody asked, were some indigenous peoples enslaved in the area by colonizers in the same way as Africans? Do you believe there should be a National Indigenous Peoples Day?
Every day is Indigenous Peoples Day. Every day that we're provided the opportunity to see the sunrise, right, and see the sunset. I do believe that we should be recognized that way every day. To answer the question about enslavement, the answer to that question is an absolutely resounding yes. As a matter of fact, all Delaware people and all Africans were considered slaves for over 200 years. There's even a court case where this comes up, and the judge makes the reference to, it's been so long that he doesn't even know why Africans or Native Americans were enslaved. Thank you so much for that. So yes, Native Americans, African Americans, Irish, Germans, right? Those were all enslaved people. It doesn't matter, which word you'd like to use, whether it's indentured servant, right? Or somebody who was actually shackled. It is a harsh reality, that we have to come to terms with. When Native people were enslaved here, it was very difficult for those people, to keep them, on that land, because they would just run away and be able to be home again, right? So what ended up happening was that they began to take our people and put them on ships. Pequots, Shinnecock, Ramapoughs, Umpqua, everybody. And there's reports in some of those old writings, that some of our people would jump off the ships because they knew that they weren't going back, and they would prefer to die honorably than to be enslaved, right? And there is some islands out there today that have, descendants of our ancestors upon them.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Chief Mann. And we really appreciate your time tonight. And we'll link everybody up with the stuff that that they're doing. And we will move on to the next speaker.
Will you send me an email?
Yeah. So what do you want me to email you?
Yeah. You can email me whatever it is that I need to provide you, and
Perfect.
I'm going to jump onto the other Zoom right now.
Cool. Yeah, and I just had to switch computers, so I was under a different computer. Now I got booted off, so I'm on this one. But thank you, everybody, and thank you so much, Chief Mann.
Nishi.
Okay. Next, we have our final speaker, Glenn Kreisberg. Glenn is an author, outdoor guide, and radio engineer who researches archaeoastronomy and landscape archaeology in the Hudson Valley and the Catskill Mountains of New York. His books include Mysteries of the Ancient Past, Lost Knowledge of the Ancients, and Spirits in Stone. He served 2 terms as vice president of the New England Antiquities Research Association and studied archaeoastronomy at SUNY and archaeoacoustics on Malta. He is co-founder of the nonprofit Overlook Mountain Center in Woodstock, New York, where he lives with his wife and 2 teenage children. And an extra special thanks to to Glenn and to Overlook Mountain Center for co-hosting our event tonight, and to Glenn for being here tonight. Please take it away, Glenn.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear and see me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let me know when you are able to see it.
We can see it. Oh, actually, yeah, I think that's yours, right? Yep.
Yes, that is. And I'm going to jump right in. I will be speaking this evening about archaeoastronomy and landscape archaeology in our region, Catskills and Hudson Valley. And some of you may or may not know what that means, but I'm going to hopefully explain what some of that is. A lot of the work having to do with archaeoastronomy in the Northeast is based on the work of James Mavor and Byron Dix, which was published in their book Manitou, The Sacred Landscape of New England's Native Civilization. This was published in 1988, and Mavor was a naval architect at Woods Hole, and Byron Dix was an optical engineer. And they were both members of NERA and did a lot of research, and they really made the case that the natives built in stone, and that in many instances they aligned their stone constructions to events on the horizon, marking special dates on the year. So this is not what's generally accepted in the Northeast, but they made a very strong case for it. And of course, worldwide, cultures have used the sky in an important way to understand, as Chief Mann was saying, when it was time to do important things like gather for holidays, plantings, the seasonal changes. It was their clock, watching the sky, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and their motion. So whether it's Stonehenge or Malta, or Chaco Canyon, or Putnam County, where we have these amazing chambers, hundreds of them, that have been built and oriented in some cases to where the sun rises on the shortest day of the year, December 21st. So these are some of the concepts that are involved with archaeoastronomy. And many of the ceremonial stone landscapes in our region have aspects and features that are related to archaeoastronomy and to what we call landscape archaeology, or using the land to help memorialize or make monuments to these events on the horizon. Now, the United Southern and Eastern Tribes, in a resolution in 2007, laid out what these ceremonial stone landscapes kind of are. And it says, within the ancestral territories of the United Southern and Eastern Tribes, there exist sacred ceremonial stone landscapes, and they're stone structures which are of particular cultural value to certain tribe members. So they're not, well, let me just keep reading. For thousands of years before the immigration of Europeans, the medicine people of the Uset tribal ancestors used these sacred landscapes to sustain their people's reliance on Mother Nature, on spirit energies of balance and harmony. Whether these stone structures are massive or small, stacked stones, stone rows, effigies, these prayers in stone are often mistaken by archaeologists and state historic preservation officers as the efforts of farmers and farm clearing and stones for agriculture and wall building purposes. So generally, Native Americans are not given credit with building in the Northeast. Part of my research is to try to help change that. And I've been creating databases of sites in our region. I kind of use the GIS methodology, where I'm looking at site locations and relationships to each other and looking for certain patterns. And then I plot them out on the map, and it helps kind of understand distribution and classification, concentrations of the sites. You can see on the bottom right, the concentration of the stone chambers in Putnam, some in Westchester, some in Southern Dutchess, and then on the left, up in the Catskill region and the Hudson Valley, sites that have been identified that have these features. So this is a chart that was provided by Professor Curtis Hoffman of UMass, showing what the angles are to the solstice sunrise, solstice sunset, and the equinox sunrise and sunset. at our latitude, which is about 42 degrees north of the equator. And as you move north or south, these angles would change based on that degree north or south. And then we can also look at the lunar or the moon rises and moon sets, and they have a minimum and a maximum that goes on an 18.6-year cycle. And Native Americans very much followed the lunar calendar and the lunar cycles as well as the sun. Putting this in a little bit more in a 3D perspective so you can understand, how from a viewing point, you can be looking at a certain direction where the sun would be rising or setting on the longest or shortest days of the year. And you can align monuments with those positions on the horizon that will stay true. And over thousands and thousands of years, it changes very little, only slightly, quite honestly. So there are many different events that take place on the horizon that are recognized, and not just lunar and solar events, but also passageways and portals that go from the underworld to the plane of the living and then to the sky world. Everything in Native American spirituality and worldview has to do with a three-dimensional, and it's quite sophisticated. We don't even really think about things in these terms today, but in ancient times, many cultures had a three-dimensional view of the world, being the celestial world above, the underworld below, both inhabited by supernatural beings, and then the plane of the living where we exist. And there are portals between those that allow for the energy and the entities to travel between those worlds. And this is an eye into the spiritual beliefs and practices of some of the native tribes. And this is generally accepted, but the problem is it's not in the textbooks. And this is what's in the textbooks. And this is from Herbert Kraft in 2001, his book, The Lenape Delaware Indian Heritage. There is absolutely no proof that man-made megaliths or dolmens, with or without grave objects, or any other manifestation of old world funerary construction or astronomical alignments exist in Lenape lands of the Northeast. And Kraft's perspective was the burden of proof is on those who make such claims, and thus far those claims have been unsupported. But I'm here to tell you that things are changing, and there's some good evidence that's been accumulated since 2000 with the help of people like Doug Harris, who was the Deputy Tribal Preservation Officer for the Narragansett, and of course Evan Pritchard, who was just a speaker earlier talking about the importance of these sites. And they're actually called Manitou Hasanash. This would be in the Narragansett dialect of Algonquin, standing for spirit stones, and in the more local Munsee, it would be Manitou Ashanel. Phonetically, not so much different from Hasanash, Ashanel, but they basically mean spirit stones. There was an important symposium held about 6 years ago by Professor Anthony Avini at Colgate University. He co-hosted it with Lori Rush, who was the cultural resource manager for Fort Drum up in the Adirondacks. And what she discovered up in Fort Drum was a very significant site. So they held this symposium and invited a lot of people to come and look at the evidence. Here's Lori explaining some of the features that they found up at Fort Drum and how these may just appear to be stones, but if you look at them in the relationship to each other, they seem to be aligned, or they are aligned with the cardinal directions, and also with the summer solstice sunrise in this instance. And here's an example of it. So this is what we talk about when we talk about archaeoastronomy and landscape archaeology. These are features that are found naturally in the landscape that can be utilized, or in some cases exploited, by indigenous populations to express their worldview and to understand the timing of the motions of the sky. So when this happened, this was a bit of a watershed moment at Colgate University, because it brought together three groups of people. It brought together the regulators, the folks from the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, people from U.S. Fish and Wildlife were there, other people who have say over whether something is designated as a sacred site or is due to protection, along with the academics who were there, archaeologists, anthropologists, and also at that symposium were Native American tribal elders and historic preservation people who were sharing their stories and explaining that, in fact, these types of sites do exist. And what the regulators had to come to terms with, the folks from the Park Service and the Forest Service and the State Historic Preservation Office, was they had to basically admit that none of this was on their radar, and they had previously had no sensitivity to these types of sites in the Northeast. So we owe a great debt to Lori Rush and to Professor Ravini for hosting this and kind of getting the word out that, in fact, in the Northeast, we do have these types of archaeoastronomy and landscape archaeology sites, which are quite honestly found throughout the world, just not accepted in the Northeast. So the Hammond line is a summer solstice line, a long distance line that goes from a big rock out on Long Island known as Council Rock, passes through Connecticut and right up into our region and intersects with the Devil's Tombstone. So until recently, we thought it was kind of a singular long distance line, but just recently a second line that parallels it, also a winter solstice sunrise, summer solstice sunset alignment. And I don't know if my cursor shows up, but here you can see the Hammond line running from Council Rock through our region, Devil's Tombstone, up to Goodyear Lake on the Susquehanna River. And just about 78 miles north is a similar line that goes from Betty's Neck, Massachusetts, through the Upton Chamber, the Bears Den Chamber, near Burnt Hill, which happens to be on the cover of my book, and then ends up at Fort Drum at that site that we saw Lori Rush documenting. So this is, very important evidence showing the significance of these sites along these lines. And, again, generally, these are not in the local office of the Historic Preservation Office of the state. These are not considered resources of cultural significance. They're just not until more work is done to document them by the academics so that they'll be accepted. And it's a slow process, but it's ongoing. We're now going to move to a site. It's a great example up in Skytop. Everybody probably knows this, up Mohonk, up the mountain house there. There's a beautiful pond just behind the tower called Lily Pond. And near Lily Pond is this stone that somebody sent me a picture of, thinking I would have interest in it. And of course I did. Now this picture was taken on any day of the year, but we happened to go up there on the summer solstice as the sun was setting, and you can see there's a shaft of light that penetrates the base of this stone and creates a projection of a glow hole or a triangle there that's lit up only on the summer solstice at sunset. Really quite interesting phenomenon, and not singular. We have other sites that also have these light phenomenons that happen on certain days of the year. Usually the solstices, the equinoxes, the shortest and longest days of the year. Here's a tool that basically superimposes the azimuth, which is a little over 300 degrees, which is what you would expect the sun to be setting at on the summer solstice. We're now going to move to a site very close to Danskammer Point, a few miles west of it, called Turtle Rock. This site I visited last year with Chief Mann, chief of the Turtle Clan, and a group of his tribal members, and we checked this site out, which is really an amazing, impressive site. You can see the head and the mouth of the turtle here. Turtles are quite common as effigies on these sites. It's very much prominent in the creation myth of many tribes throughout North America, again, known as Turtle Island. So turtle effigies should not really be all that surprising to find at Native American ceremonial sites. And of course, this is kind of the mother of all turtle effigies up there on Platyquill Mountain, this amazing stone. And on the equinox at sunset, you do have another one of these light phenomenon where the equinox sunset due west shines right in behind the head of the turtle. Quite something. In the same site, we have glyphs. There's a sun glyph here. I've highlighted it to make it a little more apparent. There's a winter sunrise viewing portal. You can actually see the Hudson River and Newburgh Bay through that. And that's where the sun would rise on the shortest day of the year in December. And there's also some very fascinating, what looked to be perhaps depictions of a comet event or comets falling through the sky. You can see two circular forms there with trails that are leading away. So this could be a very ancient site. Both the Turtle Rock site and the Lily Pond site, I believe, are constructed by some of the very first people to be in the region, Paleo people before the Archaic. Another inscription at the Turtle Rock site is a crosshatch grid inscription. Could have something to do with a calendar. It's kind of hard to say. There's another rock up there that resembles a turtle effigy. This one, if you get on it like a surfboard, it will rock and resound. And a lot of rocking stones and sounding stones are found in the Catskills and the Hudson Valley, and they usually are marking an intersection of a trail. So I put an X on the map where our Turtle Rock Mountain is found in Platyquill. You can see it's almost directly west of the mouth of the Wappingers Creek. And we're going to zoom in now on the Danskammer Point and the mouth of the creek and try to understand why this point was so significant, why the ceremonies were being held there. And I just want to take a moment to say, when we're tracing the path of racial and environmental injustices in America, you can't really go back much further than the case of Danskammer Point along the Hudson. Those injustices are found in the very name of the location, Danskammer Point. So from when the Dutch first named that prominent point of land jutting off the west shore of the Hudson River, the name they applied was Duvel's Danskammer, Dutch for the Devil's Dance Chamber. And that reflected the Dutch Calvinists' very first impressions of Native Americans as devil worshippers. And this was due to the Native American ceremonies taking place on that point of land, and quite possibly the late summer Green Corn Festival. And that may have been going on as Henry Hudson sailed up the ship past that point of land in September of 1609. And the special relationship between the point of land and the mouth of the Wappingers Creek across the river had spiritual significance to the indigenous population, because it marked an alignment that connected the earth, the water, and the sky on the longest and shortest days of the year, the summer and winter solstice. And I'm gonna show you some of that with Google Earth. For thousands of years, up until Hudson's time, that point of land was a ceremonial center for the local Wappinger people and the regional Lenape cousins living along the shore and inland up and down the river. Hudson's voyage marked the beginning of the end for that location as a spiritual center from ancient times. And due to the destruction of the Native American cultural knowledge and resources, the significance of Danskammer Point, that location was lost to history until this connection was recognized with the solstice sunrise over the mouth of the Wappingers Creek. So from 1609, let's fast forward to 1938, when Central Hudson acquired the property to construct a new electrical power plant. At that time, 1938, there was little or no sensitivity or interest to conduct archaeological surveys to investigate whether important resources of cultural significance could be at risk. And given the known history and based on the location name, there's no doubt that Native American artifacts were present and that they were not documented or considered important enough to halt the progress. So now a new power plant is being proposed for Danskammer at that location, in many respects adding insult to injury that was previously committed at the site. And this will only serve to further compound the past racial injustices and continued environmental destruction. So the new application now under consideration should take into account the long history of racial injustice, environmental destruction associated with Danskammer Point. And the state of New York should take this opportunity to correct the wrong and provide accountability for the inequities that continue to exist from our past into the present, and to protect our future from further racial and environmental inequities in our communities. And this plant would promote that, this new plant. So we certainly don't want to see that. Now, walking through what we have there, you can see a little bit more of the long shot of where Turtle Rock is, where the mouth of the Wappingers Creek is, and what the angles are. So again, referring to Curtis Hoffman's chart of 57.6 degrees for a summer solstice sunrise, and we look at from that very point of land directly over to the mouth of the Wappingers, we have 57 degrees. So, the numbers are what the numbers are. If you stand on that point of land on the summer solstice sunrise early in the morning, this is basically what you're going to see. You're going to see the sun rising aligned with the mouth of the creek and the point Danskammer jutting out into the land. Now, what's really interesting is from that same perspective at night of the summer solstice, what you have rise in the same location is the Pleiades Constellation, which was very important to the Native Americans. They tracked the Pleiades. It was one of the hands on the clock. And the fact that it rises in conjunction on the evening of the summer solstice in conjunction with the sunrise in the morning is very telling. And this is a pattern that's not just local, but there's a professor from Harvard named Gary Urton, U-R-T-O-N. And Urton is he's best known for having worked with the Inca and discovering that the knots were actually a language, not just ornamental. But he also looks at astronomy, and he found the same connection between this summer solstice sunrise and the rise of Pleiades in the same evening. And it's just not a single conjunction, because if you go from the mouth of the creek over the point, so the reciprocal, we're looking at, so a summer solstice sunrise would be a winter solstice sunset. So now we're at the mouth of the creek looking over the point, and we're no longer on June 20th, we're on December 20th. And what we have here is that the sun sets in that same spot. And then later in the evening, and again, Professor Urton confirmed this as well, you have a galactic alignment with the Milky Way. So this is very, very important in the belief system of Native tribes, not just in our region, but it's a Pan-American, it's a kind of a Pan-American thing, a phenomenon that is just recognized by indigenous people throughout the Americas as an event that takes place in conjunction. So the evidence is very strong. I think it speaks for itself. This was certainly recognized by the Native population. I think it was in some ways the center of their world, almost an axis mundi for the Wappinger and Esopus Confederacy, the people who lived in that region for many, many years, quite honestly, for 10,000 years. And they would have been watching the sky the entire time. I have to check my time because I don't know. I think we're probably at the end. I do have a couple of more slides here that I would like to share.
You should keep doing what you need to do, because we talked about our events earlier, and then if folks can stay on for questions, they're welcome to. But yeah, please continue.
Okay, well, from Dr. William Romaine at Ohio State University, who I was in contact with consulting on my research, and he said it after seeing what I compiled, it's clear to me that the Northeast has been totally and inappropriately marginalized by the mainstream, and that the Northeast US is right up there with the Southwest, Midwest, Effigy Mound, Lower Mississippi Valley, and other traditions in terms of archaeoastronomical alignments, sensitivity to landscape features, and cosmological understandings. So taking all that into account, we're going to look at one last site. I'll try to move through it quickly. It is the Lewis Hollow site on Overlook Mountain, and it brings together a lot of the different aspects of archaeoastronomy and landscape archaeology. Everyone probably is aware of Overlook Mountain. It's really kind of a landmark on the eastern escarpment of the Catskills, and there's a feature on it known as the Wall of the Manitou that actually starts from right here on this skyline and goes north about 14 miles past Platte Cove, which I know somebody asked about earlier, and Devil's Kitchen, and up to Catskill. So the site that we're looking at has been used as a serial use site by Native Americans, and also for early American commerce and industry in the form of bluestone quarrying. And you can see there that the native rock shelters go back 2000 BC, so that's quite old in the woodland period. And I consider the site a serial use site because many different groups of people used it over many years, great period of time, for many different reasons. And I kind of laid about here everything from the Native American hunting to the land subdivision and lumber and the bluestone quarrying and the tourist industry. Overlook Mountain has really kind of seen it all through all these different stages. About 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, we had a GPS survey done on the site by Susan Sweeney, who's the GIS specialist at the New York State Museum. So she came down and mapped the site out, noting the 46 small cairns, 6 large cairns, and two snake effigy walls up on the top here. And so we're going to kind of see what they look like on the ground. What I did was I focused on the 8 large formations there and kind of tied them together into a petriform. I just connected the dots in the simplest way possible. And somebody has suggested that maybe they were reflecting a constellation in the night sky. So I was a little skeptical of that, but I still drew it out. And here you can see the position of these 8 large objects. And by large, I mean these constructions are between 60 and 100 feet in length. You'll see some pictures in a moment. All the other ones are quite small, just a few meters. So as we look at the locations of these petriforms, you can see one of them is a long serpent wall about 90 feet. Another is a large cairn. 3 of them, in fact, are quite large cairns. And you can see a little bit more of the details of these different sites that make up this petriform. 2 serpent walls, one of them's in pretty good shape, the other one's pretty run down. These large cairns are, quite massive. They've taken a huge amount of effort to build. They all seem to have a downslope retaining wall that helps keep them in place. We did have tribal elders and preservation officers, including Doug Harris, including Sherry White from the Stockbridge Munsee, come and look at this site. And they were very impressed and kind of awestruck and believed that these were certainly constructions. And Sherry White believed this resembled a burial mound of the ancestors of the Stockbridge Munsee Band of Mohican. Another detail of the downslope retaining wall. So I made a diagram of it and I compared it to the constellations in the Northern Hemisphere, not really expecting to see much. But when I looked at the constellation Draco, which I didn't know anything about before this research, it struck me that it kind of looked very similar in its form. And when I put them side by side, I was really struck by the similarities, how close they represented each other. And on the left there, I put the stars of Draco with the positions of the petriforms on Overlook Mountain, kind of give them labels and line them up. So, what does that all mean? It turns out there are other sites around the world that reflect Draco. Draco is an important circumpolar constellation and always circles around the position in the sky where celestial north is. And celestial north is where the Earth's axis points. So it's not a fixed point. It kind of moves in a slow circle due to something called precession of the equinox. And the nearest star to that point is what we use to label it. So currently it's Polaris, the North Star, but 5,000 years ago, Polaris wasn't close to celestial north. What was close to it was Thuban. Thuban is the 3rd star in the tail of Draco. So as I mentioned, other cultures have used this, or I should say other researchers have identified Draco as being a construction on the ground that's reflecting a constellation in the Northern Hemisphere, including parts of the Serpent Mound in Ohio. I think I mentioned Angkor Wat in Cambodia. This is another example that researcher David Johnson documented of a site in New Hampshire that mimics or mirrors the Big Dipper, Ursa Major. So it seems to be a phenomenon. At an Overlook Mountain, if you put the location, the ground coordinates, into an astronomy program, what you'll see is that Draco always is located above Overlook Mountain. It's kind of marking celestial north for anyone living at any time in the viewshed of Overlook, and they wanted to know where celestial north is, just look towards that mountain. And I believe that's why we have these petriforms up there. And, I consider it a component petriform because it's not just all in one piece, but it's set out in different locations. But when you connect the dots, you do seem to have something that represents that constellation. And very recently, also I should just mention Draco is prominent in mythology around the world. So not just in this country, but the Chinese, the Norse, the Celts, the Persians, they all identified with Draco and also with Thuban, third star in its tail, as a pole star in antiquity. And this is just charts showing how the position of celestial north drifts and creates a giant circle, and that at different points along that circle, different stars are closest to celestial north. And whereas Polaris is the position now, in the past it was Thuban. So a lot of pre-Christian mythology involved the Draco, but to kind of simplify it, if you think of the tree of life and the tree as the Earth's axis and the serpent around it as the constellation Draco, the relationship was very important to ancient people going back into the darkest parts of history, thousands of years before the Christian mythology was attached to it. So, quite an important constellation. The research continues. A gentleman named Mark Carlotto picked up on my research and wanted to see how statistically close the Draco petriform on Overlook was to the actual constellation in the star. So he did a statistical probability analysis and found it was about 83% accurate. You wouldn't necessarily expect it to be 100% accurate because observational astronomy is just that. It's observational. It's not done with instruments or precision. It's done with the eye and then translating it to the ground. And 82 or 83% he thought was pretty good. He compared other Draco petriforms such as Angkor Wat and found it was not quite as close a correlation, though it was still a correlation. So that kind of brings me to the end of what I had to show. I'm just showing the overlookmountain.org website, which you're welcome to come and check out. Again, we have scheduled hikes and sometimes camping at some of these sites. My publisher would be upset if I didn't mention the book I have out. Came out a few years ago, which most of this research is in, plus a lot more that I haven't had a chance to get to. But with that, I'll say thanks for listening, and I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Wow, thanks so much, Glenn. Thank you, thank you. Let's see, does anybody have any questions? I see that Patricia Flood, I don't know if she's still on, but she had said that she was just about to ask you about the stone chambers in Carmel. She said that she rides back there and she's found some and that she loves exploring them.
Well, there are so many chambers in that region. It's quite a phenomenon. And I've toured quite a few of them, and I've actually toured them at one time with folks from the New York State Museum. And again, to them, they're all root cellars. They don't see anything there that was not done by the settlers. But there have been a lot of other studies that point to much older origins and much more mysterious. No native tribes have come forward in our region to say that these are their constructions. So they're still mysterious, but I'm pretty convinced they're much older than than European settlement.
Yeah, and then I'm wondering, years ago when I used to travel a lot, I remember there was like a ruin in Mexico, like near the Yucatan. It was like Mayan, and during the solstice, I want to say, or equinox, something, a snake would go up, the shadow of the snake or the son of the snake would go up and then down on 6 months later and stuff like that. So this is sort of stuff that people are doing all around the world. Can you tell us more about what you know about other places and things like that?
Oh, certainly. Well, I think what you're referring to is Chichen Itza, the pyramid of the sun in Mexico. I could have that wrong, but yeah, there is a light phenomenon there on I believe it's the equinox, where it looks like the serpent is kind of slithering up the side of the pyramid. Archaeoastronomy, people have been keeping track of the sky and the movements of the stars and the moons and the sun. It was probably the first thing anyone ever did when it came to close observation of the environment. After they got settled with how to survive, they wanted to explore, and it wasn't just their local world, it was the wide world. So you do see monuments throughout the world that are expressions of belief systems and are very much connected to that three-dimensional worldview that I said, where they believe that there were celestial beings that inhabited the heavens, but also underworld beings beneath the ground, and they would very much, through their shamanic practices and through the construction of monuments on the surface, try to regulate and control the energy and the entities so that it would be more benevolent and malevolent for their society. They really look to this for direction in their lives and the manner in which they would lead them.
Thank you, thank you. And then Carol said that she saw a label for Kingston megaliths shown on one of our alignment charts. Could you describe them and tell us where they are in Kingston?
Sure. These came to our attention when the site was actually under development. So this is in the Kingston Industrial Park down by the mouth of the Rondout Creek, the Hudson River. You would kind of have to know where to go to find these. They are kind of in plain sight near some big industrial plants that were built. But when they proposed these plants, they did an archaeological survey and they identified these 3 large boulders, standing stones really, about 6 feet tall each, kind of in a triangular configuration. And they labeled it a rock shelter. They did say it's Native American in origin because it obviously predated anything that was there. So the Kingston megaliths do have a relationship to other sites. They're on a summer solstice sunrise orientation with an important site in Turners Falls, Massachusetts. And then further on to a site in New Hampshire known as Bear Brook State Park, where that Big Dipper petriform was found. So they are significant. They're large monoliths that kind of don't fit in with what Native American were supposed to be doing thousands of years ago. But they, you can't deny they're there. They're on the land. They are, impressive, and they have relationships to other sites that fall along those solstice bearings. So really, really interesting site. We may try to plan a trip there through Overlook Mountain Center sometime this year. NERA also has conferences twice yearly, although they haven't for the past year because of COVID, but as part of their conferences, they do field trips and they do visit sites. And the Kingston megaliths was a site that we visited with NERA a few years back.
Thanks so much. Are there any other questions for Glenn? Oh, here we go. Did the Native people move the stones, or did they discover them and then use them for ceremonies?
I think both. I think when the natives came into the territory, when the indigenous or the paleo people first arrived from wherever they came from, which was probably the sea, they surveyed their area for any natural features that they could use, utilize, manipulate, turn into monuments that would express their worldview. So yes, they would both move stones, stand stones up, carve stones, realign stones, reorient them in ways that would help express their worldview. So I think that's pretty much a given.
I have a question. What's archaeoacoustics?
Archaeoacoustics is understanding how ancient people used sound, again, as part of their worldview, as part of their belief system. So on Malta, there are temples that were built. They're some of the oldest standing structures on Earth, and they have acoustic properties that, as it turns out, are able to change our brain patterns. So they understood how different tones affected our state of consciousness, and they were able to, the way we spoke about manipulating stones to express the worldview, they were able to manipulate and build architecture to manipulate sound, again, so that they could use it for meditative and practical purposes. So it's really kind of in its infancy, but it's said that archaeology without archaeoacoustics is death. So it's kind of bringing sound into the picture of archaeology.
Wow, thank you, thank you. I think everybody's learning a lot tonight. I see another question. I noticed a site on the map in New Paltz and just south of there. What are they?
I would have to have a little more information. Just south of New Paltz. Just south of New Paltz would be the Turtle Rock site in Platyquill, which we covered. A really impressive site with a giant rock shelter that resembles a turtle. So I think that's the one that is probably south. That's south and east. South and a little bit west would be some of the sites that might be in Minnewaska, which I did have labeled as well.
Great, thanks so much. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, thank you so much, Glenn, for everything. And thank you everyone for coming tonight. And then Laura just said it would be good if New York State put up new signage at the rest areas sharing this older history, which is a great idea.
We're working on that. In fact, one of the initiatives Overlook Mountain Center is involved with now is getting a sign on the Ashokan Rail Trail, recognizing the Native American and the Esopus population that lived in that area for 10,000 years. So they put up a beautiful rail trail, and they put up 10 wonderful interpretive signs talking about the towns and that were lost, and the railroad that was built and moved, and the reservoir that was constructed, but they didn't put up a sign honoring or recognizing the Native Americans. So we stepped in and got that initiative going, and that sign should be installed in the next few months. And you can find out more about that at overlookmountain.org. We had a fundraising effort that's just about wrapping up, but was quite successful.
Great, great. Thank you for your work. And then Mario asked, are there native significance to the, is it Carnes in Chapaneck?
Chapaneck Ridge, yes, absolutely. That's a Native American site. That whole ridge, so that's just north of that Platyquill Marlborough Mountain site. You go a little bit north of that, you come to Chapaneck Ridge, which has many of the same types of features: turtle effigies, rock shelters, beautifully formed cairns, and they are considered to be Native American. But again, until you get a Native tribal preservation officer from a particularly recognized tribe to come in and actually say that that's what that is, it's just speculation, but it fits the pattern, absolutely. And that ridge line that goes all the way basically from Bear Mountain up to Esopus in Saugerties, where the Esopus Creek flows into the Hudson, that whole ridge top is actually it should be designated a cultural heritage area, because it's one Native American site after another on the top of that ridge. And Chapaneck Ridge is right in the heart of it.
Thank you, thank you. Any other questions? I think we're good on questions. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Also,
somebody is making a very important point I just want to make as well. Thanks, Rob. And that is being very sensitive about disclosing locations. In my book, I do not give out locations except for a couple that are on public land that anybody can go and check out. But for the most part, these sites, it's like a double-edged sword. The more people know about them, the more that they're at risk of being disturbed or developed. So yes, definitely an important point that we want to have sensitivity to keeping these site locations protected.
great, thank you. And then we have another question from Kathleen. Where can we hear you speak again?
Oh, thanks for asking. I do give talks pretty regularly. This was kind of a shorter one. I usually go for an hour and a half, covering a lot more sites. I know I'm supposed to be interviewed one day next week on the radio somewhere with the New York Forest Association, but I don't have the details in front of me. I would say check the overlookmountain.org website. Usually if I'm giving a talk or a workshop or presentation, it's noted there on the programs page.
Great, and we'll also include your website and different stuff that you're doing in the follow-up email. And then I think almost everybody tonight filled out the RSVP form, and they could choose what they wanted to hear updates on. So a lot of you will be subscribing to Glenn's organizations, like updates and stuff like that. Well, thanks again, everybody, so much for joining, and thank you to Glenn and to Overlook Mountain Center for co-hosting, and to everybody for attending tonight, and for our other speakers. Have a good night.
Thanks, Jess. Bye, everyone.
And happy Earth Day, everybody.